everyone, my name is Ines and I run a blog called Embroidery where I share our family's journey to a slow handmade home. Now you might have seen that bobble or popcorn knitwear is really in at the moment, particularly for children. And I wanted to find a way to recreate this on finished knitting. So if I found a little jumper or cardigan at a charity shop, I would be able to upcycle it to recreate this style. So let's get started. So I've got this little pair of shorts here that I actually bought online. They were vintage. And I've started to sew on some little bobbles using an embroidery stitch called a French knot. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. If you've never done a French knot, or in fact any embroidery before, then there's no need to be afraid. It's quite easy to get the hang of. Can take a little bit of practice, so you might want to maybe just grab a scrap piece of fabric and do a few practice goes, but once you've got the hang of it you'll whiz through it. It's very easy. So you're going to need obviously your piece of knitting that you're going to put your embroidery onto. You're also going to need some yarn, so either you can use the yarn that you knitted the item in if you knitted it yourself. You could always use the same colour or a different colour, so I'm going to use a similar colour today, but you might want to do a contrasting colour. You also want to make sure it's the same weight and fibre as your knitting. So obviously I didn't knit this myself, so I've just had to match it as closely as I can, but I'm pretty sure these shorts are made of acrylic. It feels kind of a bit plasticky. So I've gone for an acrylic yarn and I've tried to match the colour as closely as I can. If you're unsure what your knitting is made of, then it's not a huge problem. I would just go for something that feels fairly similar, and when you're washing it, just wash it as wool, just so that you're sure that you're not going to be accidentally washing wool at too high a temperature and felting it. You're also going to need a yarn needle. So this is just a big fat needle which has a big enough hole at the end to thread yarn through. It's also sometimes known as a tapestry needle, so if you're looking for one online then you might find it listed as a tapestry needle. Finally, you might find it helpful to have some of these little plastic markers which are known as stitch markers. All I've done is use them to mark out where I want to place my bobbles. That's just because I have a habit of sort of my lines getting a bit wiggly if they're not planned in advance. All I did was use the knitting as a guideline, so count along a certain number of stitches to get the next marker. I think I went about 12 or 13 stitches between each one, and then similarly counted a number of stitches up to create my next row. You can obviously do them as far apart as you want to. I have gone for, I think, about 4 centimetres between each marker, so if you wanted to do it like me, then maybe you would want to go for 4 centimetres. So we're going to start by taking a length of our yarn. I like to just stretch my arms apart. You can't see that. But stretch your arms apart as far as you can, and then cut it. And we're going to thread our needle. I've actually already got a piece of yarn attached to my little shorts, so by the way, these shorts are for my kids, in case that wasn't clear. So as you can see, I've been working my bobbles in the same colour yarn as the shorts themselves, but for the sake of this video I'm going to use a contrast yarn so that you can see what I'm doing more clearly. Obviously when you're doing this you can use a contrast yarn if you want to. I just chose to make them a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to start by threading my needle, and the easiest way to do that is just to make a little fold in your yarn and press it together so that you've got a nice sort of firm end, so to speak, and then just wiggle your needle over the top of that lump until it starts to come through, and then pull it through like that. We're going to start at our next stitch marker, just here, and I'm going to start by coming up. I'm going to start by coming up next to the stitch marker, right close to it. My husband's talking to my mother-in-law downstairs. She's singing to the kids. Hopefully you can't hear that. Once I've come up, I'm just going to remove that stitch marker so it's not in the way. Now this is the part which takes a little bit of practice, but I'm going to walk you through step by step. So if you take your yarn coming out of your little pair of shorts or whatever you're embroidering, and then take your needle, place it sort of at right angles to the yarn, and then start wrapping the yarn around the needle. You can do pretty much as many wraps as you like. I'm going to do 10. The more wraps you do, the bigger the bobble you will get, but also the harder it is to keep it looking neat, just because you're doing a bigger knot. Once you've got your wraps, you want to keep your tension on this piece of yarn that you're holding. That's really important. So the entire time that you're completing the knot, keep the tension on this yarn and push your needle down back into the fabric. You want to come through to the bottom, pull it all the way through. If you lose the tension, just put it back on. It's incredibly hard to do this on camera, but hopefully you're getting the idea. And there you have it, a little bunch of yarn. It should almost make like a sausage shape, and because of the way that is, it's sort of a bit bobbly. So what I like to do is just attach it down at one end. So if you come up towards the bottom of your knot, at the base almost, back up like that, and then come over it and down just above the top. Whenever you're doing any form of embroidery, you can just guide the yarn where it needs to go. So if that loop isn't sitting there, then just make sure it sits right across the middle of the knot and pull it tight. And that will just help it to sit a bit more neatly on the fabric. So we're going to come up again next to the next stitch marker. Make sure that you don't pull too tightly because it will make the fabric bunch up. So just make sure that you're leaving plenty of leeway at the back. Again, just remove the stitch marker. Then keep the tension on the yarn and wrap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Back down into the fabric. When you go back down, you want to go beside the spot where you came up. If you go down into the same hole, you will just unravel your knot. Should have mentioned that the first time. This is very important. Make sure that you're going down next to the hole where you came up and not into the same point where you came up from. I hope that is clear. Keeping tension on that yarn as I pull through to the back. It's a tiny bit fiddly, but hopefully you're getting the idea. Now this one you can see has come out really quite tight, so in that case I just like to fluff it up a bit, make it a bit more bobbly. Once you've fluffed it up a little bit, it should look like that, and then we're going to do the same thing and bring our needle up at the base of the little knot. And then once again, take the yarn up and over the knot to secure it down. So I'm going in just ever so slightly underneath the knot so that it's not quite so obvious that I've just done an attaching stitch. Pull it tight so it sits nice and flat. And then you just want to continue all the way along your stitch markers. As you come to the end of them, just add add more rows as needed, and cover as much of the area as you'd like to.